Hello and welcome to another episode of Hot Media with Bob Mann. And, one of the things we like to do on this podcast is to look at all aspects of media. Of course, we talk mostly about journalism. We talk a lot about entertainment, but also sports. And one of my go to people for talking about sports media is a genuine expert, a professor, a practitioner. He was a writer for the New York Times for many years. My friend from college, Malcolm Moran, who right now is director of the Sports Capital Journalism Program at IUPUI in Indianapolis. And Malcolm is here to talk about a lot of the relationship of sports and media, not just the rights fees and the ratings, but also the impact of athletes in the arena of public opinion. So, Malcolm, thank you very much for taking the time to do Hot Media again.
It's good to be with you, Bob.
Let's talk a little bit about Aaron Rodgers, who has made some pretty amazing statements, and I will quote them verbatim here. I understand that people are suffering, but I am in the crossfires of the woke mob. And, this is really bizarre when he said that he didn't lie about being immunized when he wasn't vaccinated. He made reference to being the target of the woke mob. This seems rather inappropriate for somebody who had been tapped to guest host Jeopardy only a couple of months earlier. What impact do you feel that Aaron Rodgers' very odd statements about the vaccine have on the public and on the sport?
Well, I think you're talking about two different levels, and that's part of what makes this really interesting, because historically, the Green Bay fan base has been extremely supportive in a way that you could say the Northeast corridor, New England, New York, Philadelphia, DC. Those fans historically have not been as patient when things aren't going well. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how that fan base in Green Bay responds to this, because he's clearly putting a political spin on this, and he's appealing to a certain segment of the audience that happens to agree with him. I think that argument misses the point entirely. And I think the real point here was best articulated by Tony Dungy on Sunday night when he framed this as a leadership issue. When Rodgers came back after all that drama of Willie or Won't and said, I'm all in, and my leadership role here is important, etc., what kind of a leader are you if you're at the least misleading your teammates in that room about whether you were vaccinated or not, and potentially putting them at risk, but more to the point, putting the team at risk because of the structure of people testing positive and having to sit out. He is handsomely paid for being available, and he was unavailable for reasons that are extremely avoidable. And so to me, that failure in leadership is really the core of what we're talking about here.
Of course, this is not the first major star who has created a controversy by not being vaccinated. But even though I'm a fan of the Brooklyn Nets, I don't really care about the Packers. Obviously, living here in the New York tri-state area, I tend to be a local team rooter. But Kyrie Irving, his spin on the vaccine and his refusal to take it is actually a bit different from Aaron Rodgers. It doesn't seem as if he's made it political. I don't agree with his decision. I think he's putting the Nets in a terrible position, the NBA in a terrible position. But I feel it's a little bit different in the manner in which Kyrie handled it. Give me your take on that, Malcolm.
I would agree that it's different. And I don't happen to agree with his stance. I think it's a fairly simple public safety issue to protect yourself and the people around you. But he is sacrificing a significant amount of income to take this stand. So it comes down to a personal stand. And again, because of his prominence within that organization. I mean, I go back to the leadership issue. Are you there in a way that supports your teammates and puts them in the best position to succeed as a group, or are you not?
Let's talk a little bit about the broader aspect of this. The idea of athletes who, I'm not saying that athletes should just keep themselves to playing sports and not express themselves as human beings, but do they have a tremendous influence in areas in which they may not be expert? For example, Aaron Rodgers talking as if he knew the science better than the scientists. Can there be an outsized influence on the part of athletes who may not be experts in areas simply because many people see them as idols, heroes, and who was it, Charles Barkley, who was famous for saying, I'm not a role model, but nonetheless are put into the role of being models? Is
Well,
this something where our society has really put maybe too much stock in what the athletes have to say?
oh, absolutely. And and that's not to place a value on it. There are some high profile athletes that have used that platform magnificently. Exhibit A is what LeBron James has done for young people in his hometown of Akron, creating a school. I mean, putting his own money on the line to use his influence and his high visibility to give young people that lack those kind of resources a chance to get a good education. And to me, that's an example of somebody making use of the platform in an incredibly constructive way. I mean, if you go back a few more years, Michael Jordan made the decision that he didn't want to get involved in a public way with controversial things. I mean, he was famously credited with saying, Republicans buy sneakers too. I mean, it's a personal choice, and it
That was
comes
in one of
down
those
to,
Senate races, right? That was in either North or South Carolina in a Senate race where people were saying that they wanted Michael Jordan to take a stance and to endorse a candidate, and he chose not to.
well, and that's his right. I mean, before uh, the Sandusky issues at Penn State and that entire scandal that was at its peak 10 years ago this week, I mean, there were a number of efforts made by people in the Republican Party in Pennsylvania to get Joe Paterno to run for some kind of statewide office, and he just decided, I'm a football coach, and I'm not going to run for office. So I mean, you're always going to have that dynamic because of the visibility and the fact that people will make value judgments about high-profile athletes based on their skill and how they go about their business.
Let's just expand the conversation a little bit because we bring you on about 4 times a year to talk about sports media in general. You said something that really struck a note with me over the course of the summer when we weren't even close to the playoffs of the World Series in Major League Baseball, which is that these games just start too late. They're not really nurturing their child, their youth future because of the fact that so many kids can't stay up to see a team actually win a World Series. The games are going 4 hours long. They're starting at around 8:20 Eastern time. Now that the World Series has occurred between Houston and Atlanta, did this play out to some degree? I'm not saying it's a direct cause and effect, but did we again see a World Series that didn't electrify the nation the way that the Super Bowl does?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think part of it is a lack of accessibility. I mean, the fact that the Super Bowl, I mean, the NFL, which I think is universally regarded as the most successful sports organ, organization in terms of the way it has created a 12-month a year interest. The Super Bowl has the NFL has figured out a way that the Super Bowl can be over at a reasonable hour on the East Coast. It does not start at 8:15 Eastern, 8:20 Eastern. And I think baseball has made an enormous mistake. I completely understand that the old days of weekday afternoon games are a thing of the past, and I'm not here to suggest that should change. But the fact that weekend games or Sunday games specifically on a school night can't take place at even late afternoon Eastern time. I mean, why is baseball so afraid of the NFL? The World Series used to be absolute appointment viewing, regardless of who was playing. I mean,
And
if the
I
Yankees
agree.
were playing the Cincinnati Reds, people in California are still going to watch, and that has not changed. And there were all kinds of wonderful storylines with this year's series. Dusty Baker, who I feel strongly already has put together a Hall of Fame resume, getting another chance to get that elusive world title. The fact that the Braves remade themselves on the fly after the Acuna injury and other issues they had to work through, and the fact that they were so ordinary for so long and played so well at the end. But clearly, if you look at the numbers, a significant portion of the country just didn't identify with that, and that's too bad.
Yeah, I mean, what they're afraid of and what they're trying to avoid is exactly what they're walking into: low ratings and a loss of the fan base. I guess they don't want to go up against the 4 o'clock game of the NFL on a Sunday. Some of it, I guess, has to do with the fact that Fox has the NFC as well as MLB. That could be part of the whole legal logistics of it. But I remember a transitional period. I agree with you that the weekday afternoon games were ridiculous. I remember sneaking in a radio to try to listen to it until my, sixth grade nun caught me and I got in trouble for it. I don't romanticize that, but there was in the late 70s a period of nighttime weekday games, which began at a reasonable hour around 7:30. And then Saturday and Sunday were day games. There was that time when they did that. And that seems like where they probably could meet a nice compromise and give people, including kids, a chance to actually see the premier event of Major League Baseball.
Well, and in fairness, I mean, since we're being critical of decisions that have been made by MLB, to be fair, college football Saturdays are completely different now than they were until the Supreme Court ruling in '84 that basically took the influence out of the NCAA and eliminated all of the limitations that used to be in place in terms of the number of times that teams could make appearances and all of that. So now, I mean, you may have 30, 35 college football games on TV on a Saturday afternoon and evening. That was a challenge that didn't exist when the World Series was king. But still, I think when there's been recognition for a number of years now that young people are just not getting on board with baseball in the same numbers that they did historically, that one way that you can address that is to have at least some of your most significant games, your most important product, on at a time when young people can watch.
And just finally, let's talk about the upcoming Olympics. We're just out of the previous Olympics. Obviously, everybody knows the reason with COVID and the delay of Tokyo to 2021, but we're coming up on Winter Olympics. In terms of coverage, in terms of access, is this going to be any different in terms of an experience for the athletes or in terms of the fans thousands of miles away who'll be experiencing it through the media?
Yes, it's going to be very different. And the concern that's already been voiced by a number of influential organizations and high profile journalists who have covered the Olympics for years is that the Chinese government is going to use the pandemic as an excuse to impose much more restrictive access regulations than are even necessary given the conditions. That the concern is that it's going to be even stricter than Tokyo was in terms of where you can go, who you can talk to, and all of that. And so it's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out, and how outspoken journalists are, including NBC, because you have to remember the NBC coverage operates on two levels. There is the rights holder relationship with the International Olympic Committee, which basically makes NBC a business partner with the Olympic Games. But then there's also the NBC News division, which is covering this as a news event, and I would anticipate is going to be spending a significant amount of time talking about human rights issues and other important issues that are surrounding the enterprise. So it's going to be very interesting to see how all of that plays out in terms of the coverage.
I think people don't realize that this is a business partnership. You're paying over the years, NBC, billions of dollars for all of their networks and streaming services. And you can be cut off, and you almost are forced into the role of a cheerleader or a public relations partner when sports is journalism as well as entertainment. It really is a double-edged sword that I think a lot of people in the public don't realize. That's the relationship, at least of the media company, which in this case, NBC, Universal, Comcast, is the partner of the Chinese government, the Olympic Committee. This is a business proposition worth at least millions of dollars.
Well, and that dual relationship and the possibility of a conflict between the sporting event coverage and the news coverage. I mean, in the modern era, that goes back as far as Munich, when all of a sudden Jim McKay famously is sitting in a studio on short notice, and he is now anchoring coverage about a tragedy when the attacks took place in the Olympic Village in Munich and impacted the Olympic Games forever.
And ABC did a great job with that, with McKay, with Cosell. They shifted totally into the journalism mode, even though this was their big entertainment spectacular, the 72 Summer Olympics. And I remember the famous line that McKay just said, "They're gone. They're all gone," after it was accounted for that all the athletes had indeed been murdered. Malcolm, it is always a pleasure to have you here on the podcast. Obviously, you know, I mentioned in the beginning that you had been a writer for the New York Times and for USA Today, and now teaching at the university level. But you really have an insight into sports that is very, very broad, and I am really happy that you take the time 4 or 5 times a year to be here on Hot Media.
Always good to be with you.
Now, listen, the video is live to tape here, so I want to talk to you afterwards. So if you don't mind just hanging in while I do my sign off here, and then I'll shut down. I will talk to you right after, okay?
Yes, sir.
All right, hang in there for just a second. That's it for this episode of Hot Media. I want to thank again my guest, Malcolm Moran. And, you know, you can find out everything about this podcast, which is still primarily an audio podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Odyssey, etc. But we are on YouTube. And if you go to the YouTube channel, please do subscribe. You can find out everything by going to www.bobmanhotmedia.com. Please follow me on Twitter, my handle @BobManMedia, and subscribe on one of the audio services, or that you would also subscribe on YouTube, on the YouTube channel. Right now, you have to search it under Bob Mann Hot Media. But that's it, and I thank you very much for listening and for watching. And join us every week as we talk about the hottest controversies and the hottest content in mass media right here on Hot Media.